Hi, this is Miss Wright, and I'm going to go over Stage 1 review from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The source for these cards comes from Quizlet, and this is the creator, Penguin 1479, and I've added to it, and I've also added some illustrations, but if you want to go to Quizlet, type this in, you'll get this person's original list. Okay, how is Pip related to Mrs. Joe? She is his sister. She is his much older sister. This is from the movie Mrs. Joe, Joe, and Pip. At what time have all the clocks stopped at Mrs. Havisham's? 20 to 9. 20 to 9. Eating a large amount in one bite is called bolting your food. Bolting your food. Estella traveled there to be educated as a lady according to Miss Havisham. And the country is France. How does Joe feel about Pip's great expectations? He feels sad that Pip is leaving, but he's proud. How is Estella related to Mrs. Havisham? They aren't blood relations. Estella is Miss Havisham's adopted daughter or ward. How is Pip related to Mrs. Joe? She is his much older sister. Duplicate. How many years has Pip been an apprentice before learning of his great expectations? 4 years go by. The mysterious stranger at the Jolly Bargeman stirs his drink with what? A metal file. This is the same file that Pip gave the convict to cut through his leg irons. Pip takes a coach to where after he gets his money? He goes to town to buy new clothes. They are a symbol of his new life. Why does Pip want to become a gentleman? Pip wants to become a gentleman because Estella calls him coarse and common, a coarse and common laboring boy. Prison ships are called hulks. Huge ships that were kept off the coast, and they were makeshift prisons. Orlick and Joe get into a fight. Who caused the fight? Mrs. Joe, because she felt offended by Orlick's remarks. The waxed-tipped cane used for spanking Pip is euphemistically called the tickler. It's hard to see, but she has a long piece of cane of bamboo in her hand here. What are the conditions under which Pip is to receive his great expectations? He must always retain the name Pip. The benefactor remains secret unless he reveals himself. What does Mr. Wopsle's great aunt run in the evenings? A school that is out of control because she often dozes off during instruction, and the children run wild. Pip doesn't learn much there. What does Pip's convict ask him to bring to the graveyard? Food and a file, and this is a picture of a pork pie. It's a pie that has meat baked in instead of fruit. What is Joe's occupation? He is a blacksmith. Here's an anvil, and he would be working with heavy metal objects. What is Pip's real name? How does he get it? His real name is Philip Pirrip, but he's called Pip because he couldn't pronounce his full name. He could only say Pip. What is the Blue Boar? An inn or public house, aka a pub. What is the name of Mrs. Havisham's house? What does it mean? Her house's name is Saddest House. It means enough house or more than anyone could want. The name becomes ironic because of its current dilapidated condition. What is the only word Joe can read or write? His name. And he can't actually spell his name because he only knows a J and an O. What will be taken from Pip and eaten if he fails to bring what the convict wants? His heart and liver. The convict says this to terrorize the little boy. When convicts are found in the ditch, what are they doing? They are fighting. They're trying to kill one another, actually. Where does the opening scene take place, and why is Pip there? It's in the cemetery. He wants to see his parents' gravestones. It's his only way of having some clue to what kind of people they might have been by the formation of the letters on their tombstones or gravestones. While Pip is in the village, something happened. What is it? Mrs. Joe is attacked. Who comes to the door as Mrs. Joe is getting ready to serve the pork pie? The soldiers. They need Joe to fix their broken handcuffs. Who does Pip meet on the steps at Miss Havisham's? Who has hands that smell of scented soap, and what does that imply? He meets Mr. Jaggers. He is an acquaintance of Miss Havisham's. He is wealthy and maybe upper class. Whom does Pip teach to read and write? He teaches Joe, because we know that Joe was not educated. Who first helped Pip to learn to read and write? And that was Biddy, his friend. Who is Matthew Pocket? Miss Havisham's cousin who does not come to visit. He will not treat her with the respect she thinks she deserves. Who is the journeyman at Joe's forge? Orlick, who is kind of a menacing looking character, always slouching about. Whom does Biddy suspect of Mrs. Joe's attack? Orlick, because she saw his hammer. Who takes Pip to Mrs. Havisham's the first time? Uncle Pumblechook. Who takes the blame for the food stolen from Mrs. Joe's house? Pip's convict. He doesn't want Pip to get in trouble for stealing. Who tells Pip he will have great expectations? It's Mr. Jaggers who brings the news of Pip's great expectations. Should have an S at the end here. Why does Miss Havisham give Joe money? For Pip's apprenticeship. Pip will be legally bound once documents are filed. Why does Pip visit Mr. Trabb, the tailor? To get new clothes, he ends up ordering an elaborate costume which makes him look ridiculous. That's a duplicate. Sorry. Why do Pip and Orlick have a difficult relationship? Orlick used to scare Pip when he was younger. He thinks Joe favors Pip over him, and Pip suspects him of attacking Mrs. Joe. Why do soldiers come to the door? To get the blacksmith to fix their handcuffs. Why is the convict particularly enthusiastic about the fact that Pip lives with a blacksmith? He could get a file to cut off his leg irons. With whom does Pip have a confrontation when he visits the tailor? Trabb's boy, who's standing here in the corner and who becomes a nemesis for Pip whenever he comes back to town. Domestic violence. We see several examples, such as Life at the Forge. Mrs. Joe, ironically, is the violent one and verbally abusive to Pip and Joe. Joe's father was violent and an alcoholic. This is part of why Joe was never educated. And if you read closely, the part with Joe's father is a type of social criticism. More social criticism. Children in Victorian society. Children were to be seen and not heard. They could not object to adult commands, and there was no social safety net to make sure that they were cared for and educated if their parents could not provide for them or died. And this was a particular concern for Charles Dickens because he was forced to work at a very early age because of what happened with his father. Theme: money changes people. Once news spreads of Pip's expectations, almost everyone treats him differently. He is the same person, but they equate money with respectability. He is elevated in their minds because he now has money. Theme of snobbishness. We began to see signs that Pip might look down on some of those around him now that he has a brighter future. Or did his snobbishness actually begin before news of his expectations? So you have to go back and read carefully. There are signs in the text that Pip is changing and not in good ways. But when did that actually begin? Was it with the money or was it even before the money? Literary lens, psychological. How does Pip change his thinking and attitudes during stage 1? What's up with Miss Havisham? Is she stuck in a psychological stage? How would you describe her psychologically? Is she depressed? Does she have repressed anger? What's going on there? So there's some questions to ask yourself. Feminist lens. How are women viewed and treated during stage 1? Think about Biddy, Estella, Mrs. Joe, Miss Havisham, and some of the other women in stage 1. What type of woman does each represent? Marxist lens. How are the poor or lower classes treated by the middle and upper classes? Is there any opportunity for upward mobility in the society? Bildungsroman. A coming-of-age novel. We meet Pip at about the age of 7 and stay with him